Everyone, welcome. We're going to give it a few seconds for people to join, and then we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Modern Infrastructure Zero Trade-Offs. We're excited to be presenting to you today. I will go ahead and introduce our speakers. So today we're going to have Rob Girard and Jason Massae, both from Vast Data. Rob is our cyber resilience and virtualization specialist, and Jason is our technical marketing engineer. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Analia.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone in the audience, we welcome questions. Please ask your questions. Just use the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. You can ask these questions anonymously by clicking the hide name checkbox. We will try and get to your questions at the end, but if we miss your question today, we will try to follow up with you. We will follow up with you, actually with the right person from VAST to answer those questions for you. Thanks so much. And guys, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily.
Great. Thank you.
So here's a quick agenda as we go through this. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A. Rob and I will try and get through those. So let's jump in. So the idea of this presentation is customers, as they're looking through the landscape of different types of virtualization options and possibly changing options, which we're going to talk about that here in just a bit, there's a lot of ideas that you have to think about when you're thinking about what solution or what options you have for some type of virtualization. Here's a bunch of the common ones. VMware, of course, one of the most popular, Hyper-V becoming popular again. Kubernetes really becoming super popular, fairly simple. Kind of lends itself to a different way of programming. So we're seeing a lot of Kubernetes stuff coming out. And then some of the other ones, KVM, Proxmox, Zen, and then of course we've got OpenShift and OpenStack. So when customers are looking at all of these different things, right, there's different ideas of why they might choose one or the other. So Rob, you have
Jason,
any comments?
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to interrupt for a sec. Maybe we can do a brief intro because you're talking on virtualization, and I'm kind of wondering, do you have any authority on the topic? And so maybe you could just share your background on it so that people have a little bit of context of where you're coming from.
Sure. So if you aren't familiar with who I am, possibly from VMware, I was the technical marketing architect for VMware for all storage things. And once Broadcom bought VMware, there was some changes, and we're actually going to talk about that. So when it comes to virtualization, I've been working on virtualization for probably 20 some odd years. So a lot of different aspects, a lot of different tools, and so that's where I'm coming from. So that's where what Rob is asking about is that you definitely got somebody who's used to working with a lot of these different areas.
And just a quick intro on myself. I've been at VAST for over 3.5 years. I'm in the office of the CTO. I'm the PM for our Kubernetes CSI driver. So I do a lot of conversations around modernized containers and Kubernetes. I'm a V expert, a 12x V expert in running. I've been doing, I think I got my VMware VCP 20 years ago in 2005 now. So I've been doing this a long time, and I've got 16.5 years on the customer side prior to being on the vendor side. And I've been on the vendor side for about 11 years. And prior to VAST, I worked for a storage company that focused on virtualization, file system for virtualization. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm often tapped as an SME to speak with various customers and partners here at VAST. Jason's more of a known secret to the field, but with this webinar out, I'm sure he's going to be tapped a lot more to join those conversations as well. So didn't mean to interrupt. We can carry on though. I thought that was maybe important to add some context.
Sure. No, that was good. So one of the things that when you're looking at virtualization, there's a couple of different areas. Now, normally this slide would have built out, but the idea is when customers are looking at virtualization, there's a couple of different reasons why a certain solution might be chosen. Price obviously becomes one of the more popular, especially with some of the recent changes in the market, especially with VMware. And that may lend yourself to one or two or three of the solutions. Another one is functionality. So depending on what the requirements are for your applications, for your infrastructure, for your enterprise, whatever it might be, there's certain functionality that you may need. And so that may eliminate some of the options that are available out there in the market. Now, another one is support. There are some solutions that are a lot less expensive, but they may not have the support that an enterprise needs. And so depending on what that solution is and what the support requirements are for your enterprise, that can be another decision maker. And then, of course, knowledge. Now, this is one that I want to spend a little bit of time on because a lot of customers, especially with the recent, Broadcom VMware thing, there's a lot of customers that are wanting to get off of VMware. And Rob and I have talked about this a lot, and we both have a lot of input on this. And the idea is your enterprise may have been using VMware for a long time, or maybe have been using some other solution. It doesn't necessarily have to be a VMware. VMware is one of the more popular. And they're thinking about moving off of that solution for possibly one of the other reasons, maybe price, functionality, support, whatever it might be. But one thing that we want to make sure that you're aware of is that when you think about moving off of a solution, especially something like VMware, is do you have the knowledge to move within your organization to another solution? Now, I've talked to a lot of customers about this because I was still at VMware for a while when this happened, when the Broadcom acquisition happened. And there was a lot of customers who were like, I just want to get off of VMware. It's too expensive. Totally understand it's a completely valid reason for wanting to get off of VMware because of some of the price hikes. But you have to think about what you have with that specific solution. And again, this could be other solutions. VMware is obviously the most popular. But when you move, do you have the education and the knowledge within your environment to support that new solution? Or you're going to have to hire somebody, or you're going to have to train somebody. So in some cases, you may save money by moving off of one solution to move to another solution, but do you have to hire another full-time employee? Do you have to get training for your existing infrastructure and your team that's supporting that infrastructure? So make sure that before you make a decision on what you might want to move to or add or supplement in your environment, what are some of the options that you can use within your environment, whether it's knowledge, and then one of the things we're going to talk about is also infrastructure.
Yeah. So on the topic of stay or go and choosing your solutions, right? We do have another slide after that we can elaborate a little bit more. This slide here, and just to level set the entire presentation, this is intended to be a kind of a 101 level presentation. Jason and I spent a long time and tried to figure out how do we not turn this into a multi-day session when we're intending to give an hour into it. So we want to kind of go high level across a lot of things, discuss some of the trends that we're seeing, and then also then go into individual series after this and drill deeper on specific solutions. So for those virtualization solutions out there, there's probably some factors we missed here, but the knowledge one is definitely a big one. Knowledge bias is a really big one because sometimes you forget what you know and things, are at your fingertips and you just easily do things. And sometimes you forget what a struggle it is when you're doing things for the first time, every time. So that too can create some bias. Maturity, next point on here is, as it's been around for a while, it's a very mature solution, right? And the longer something's been around, the more the hands it's gone through, the more eyeballs on it. We definitely, there's different requests that go into it. So you get something that's very polished and something that's been around for a couple decades or more in the case of VMware. Certainly is a very mature solution out in the marketplace. And then when we talk about the marketplace, let's think of the ecosystem. So it's not just the product and your comfort running with it. It is who else in the community is running it. So are there a lot of forums to get help in and to share your experiences? Are there a lot of technology alliance partners that are lined up with that solution to provide things that sometimes we take for granted as table stakes, but things like backups, and not just backups, but smooth backups. Picking on VMware, for example, we've got some great backup APIs built into it so that we don't necessarily need to have snapshot integration with that backend storage to be able to freeze a disk and read stuff out of it, do incrementals through change block tracking, and don't underestimate just how much time, effort, change block tracking provides instead of having to read something all the way through and then try and have your system figure out what the incremental change was on that. And then the last bullet on infrastructure, Jason, if you want to just hit on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so again, this is all about making decisions on where you may migrate. And this is really where we want to tie VAST in. A lot of customers, when they decide to migrate from maybe one solution to another, may not have the infrastructure ready, especially on the storage side, to support that new solution. Or, and this is another big piece that Rob and I had talked about earlier when we were kind of working on this presentation, was can a customer use the same, say, storage solution to do a partial migration or a temporary migration, or, hey, I just want to see if this solution works, but will the infrastructure be able to support both or multiple solutions at the same time without having to, say, double or triple the amount of storage utilization? So that's something that VAST can do with this piece of it, is give you that functionality that allows you to use, say, VMware and, say, OpenShift or OpenStack or Hyper-V or any of the other ones. VAST is capable of actually supporting all of them at the same time, and let you maybe do a step instead of a jump. So you can say, well, let me try this. Let me see how hard it's going to be to try and move to this new solution. And I have plenty of storage because of our dedupe and our similarity decompression, or dedupe and compression. That can really lend itself to being able to say, well, I'm going to try actually multiple. So there's a lot of capabilities that you have to think about when you're looking at these other solutions. Do I have the storage capacity? Do I have the storage performance? That's another piece, right? If I start adding another completely different solution on top of your existing storage, is it capable of maintaining the existing solution and the new solution that you might be looking at?
And on that topic, on the VAST side, another feature that we have was introduced a couple versions ago or a few versions now, global snapshot clones, which allows us to create clones to another box or into itself. And so this is a safe way to take all those data stores you may have, or all of the set of volumes associated with VMs or other platforms and stuff, to be able to safely make a copy of all those, a good point in time state so that it's all consistent. And then also with the ability to do C-node pooling on the VAST side, we can, with our days architecture, we can take some of these front-end C-nodes that provide the horsepower and the brains to the operation, and we could even completely separate those out so that they can be plugged into a clean room or isolated environment scenario to run through some modeling, risk-free to the rest of the stuff through completely sets of VLANs and IPs, completely separate networking. So we've got a lot of options there that make VAST a very flexible solution to go underneath this, and a very future-proof solution, so that it's not built for what you have today and what you know only tomorrow. And we will go in deeper on all the protocols that we support, and how that lends us to support so many more solutions. And just something to keep in mind too, I think a lot of our audience in this case may be coming from some of the cloud service providers, managed service providers. And so in a lot of these cases, the choice of what you're running isn't exclusively yours. You got customers coming to you saying, hey, I would like this, I want this, and nobody wants to turn down that business. And so you want to make sure that what you have underneath it is going to support not only what you want to run and encourage, but be flexible enough to support what your customers are bringing to you.
Yeah, those are all
that's
really
a good time to cue forward here.
Yeah. And this really, this one, this slide here really kind of dives in specifically to the VMware aspect, because this has brought a lot of turmoil to the industry. And a lot of customers are maybe even being forced or deciding to move off of VMware. And this is really to dive into that piece where we really want to say, before you move or before you supplement, look at all of the options, right? What are going to be the consequences of migrating your infrastructure or your solution from one to another? And the other piece is, are you going to move wholly or are you going to move partially, right? You might be able to reduce your footprint, your VMware footprint, by maybe taking some of your workload into one of the other solutions. And that could reduce your overall cost. And that might be one option as well. Another one, and this is one that Rob and I really discussed in length, I think we spent a good 30 minutes on it, was the OpEx point of view, right? Are you going to have to change your scope of what is supported and your processes and your procedures that have maybe all been really well documented and they're very rigid, and now you're moving to a new solution? Is that new solution going to fall into that SOP, right? Is there a way that you can go, okay, I'm going to go from VMware to, say, OpenStack? Is that going to work? Or do you have to change? You have to rewrite that? Is my OpEx going to increase because now, before with VMware, you could support 5,000 machines with one full-time employee, right? One FTE. But now with OpenStack, it might take, 2 or 3 FTEs to support that solution. So your OpEx could go up, even though you might be reducing your VMware cost. And then, like we were just talking about, does your infrastructure support that different migration and that different solution?
Just before we hit that last one, I do want to elaborate a little bit here, because this was something from my experience that took me a little by surprise. Let's go rewind the clock to 2011, and I'm working for a financial firm, and I came in and I was brought in primarily to virtualize things and bring it forward and modernize things. And there was a lot of bare metal in and around, and there were a lot of process and procedure in place and teams in place. And I had already brought 2 various different companies, an insurance company and then another, up to like near 100% or fully 100% virtualized status. And so I was eager, and I was looking at the landscape of new players that were out at the time, and there were some new. That was a very interesting time. New storage players were emerging in that 2011, 2012 space, and new products. At this point, virtualization and VMware was tilting towards mainstream, and there were technology alliance partners getting around it. People were doing things differently. They were not clustering the way they would with bare metal. The approach to backup was a bit different, because you had this built-in portability with it already. and this abstraction of your data, and a VM is now data instead of being coupled to specific hardware. So that adjusted things around DR, and this is great. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to consolidate things, I'm going to save some money, I'm going to reduce the power and cooling and reuse our servers, and I'm going to back them up with these, Veeam at the time. I was, am still excited about Veeam, but I was very excited about bringing Veeam in because it's a backup product intended for virtualization, and I'm going to a virtualization first, and I put in some Brocade switches, which were, the first Ethernet switches that ever wanted to know who my vCenter was. And, I could see this visibility from that stack coming down, and my storage wanted to know who my vCenter was so they could tie things in. And as I'm going down here, I'm making some great progress on a tight timeline. And then, someone's, hey, Rob, what about all these? And, they're pointing me to these existing procedures. They're pointing me to the audit procedures as well. And so being a financial firm, we've got quarterly, biannual, and annual audits. And these audits are very specific so that when your auditor comes in, it is not that you're perfect or anything like that. It's just that you have stated procedures and that you follow them, and then they spot check them. So the amount of work was, in retrospect, a lot to take on, because it was not just getting things over the line, reduced or no downtime, and going through a change into new things. It was all of the supporting documentation that had to go around it, approval of that documentation as well, the audit and stuff going forward. And then we still had things like backups and stuff that have a 7-year retention period that, even though, hey, this is great, the new stuff goes here, we still had to retrieve old stuff. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And a lot of times we get into this position where we kind of, there's a dark, stormy cloud a little bit, and we can kind of maybe over obsess on it, and we'll get into that grass is greener on the other side type of mentality. And then as we get over to that other side, and it turns out that there's clouds there and it rains there too, and the list goes on. At some point, if you are augmenting your staff and putting a lot of effort in, and you've kind of lost sight of the things you take for granted, which is reducing your staff costs. If you've got a solution that works really cleanly and really well, there's a lot less troubleshooting if you've got great visibility. Maybe sometimes it comes down to a performance. It gets a few more % performance. That can make a big difference of whether you start to chew things or not. And it's one thing when things aren't overtaxed and oversubscribed and over provisioned. It's another when you go over that line and you run things pretty red. Not all solutions work the same when things are being pushed to its limits. And I think VMware deserves a lot of credit and a lot of things that it did to support over provisioning in a fairly clean way. So there's a lot to consider, and so like sometimes I recall back a good number of years ago with the VTAX coming for, I think it was VRAM at the time, and there's a lot of people, I'm going to leave, and some people did leave and they found other solutions, and others kind of stuck it through, and the course got corrected, and in some cases, yes, the cost went up, but the cost of business as a whole goes up. And then not needing to augment with more people, it actually, even though the cost goes up, it's still potentially favorable to stay where you are. So, but you do want to keep an eye out on the horizon and keep up with trends and stuff, because you never know when that next thing is coming that is actually on par or better, or serves your business better. And sorry for that little rant, but I just needed to get some of that out of me, because I get these things inside me where should I do it or not? And I start weighing all of these things, and it's hard to put the weights on things. And some of it is very hard to quantify, and they're in these decisions. So there can be a long tail to your decision as well.
No, that's all very valid. And that's what the idea is, to kind of bring all these ideas to the surface, so that customers that are thinking about moving are looking at both Do I move because of the solution? And can I move because of my infrastructure? So now we'll start going into a little more specific on how VAST allows you to do these options without having to have multiple storage siloed solutions. In some cases, right, one solution might require one type of storage, another one might require another type of storage. So the idea is on the picture here is that siloed storage is requiring multiple admins possibly, or an admin that is really diverse in multiple solutions. Whereas when we have the VAST solution, you can have one admin that uses almost the same processes regardless of the solution, right? Because we support all of these different protocols, which we're going to jump into here next, is allowing you to have one solution that allows you to change both storage and compute independently, which the next slide we're going to talk about the whole days architecture. But these are things that customers have to think about, because if they already have an existing solution, now beneficially, if they've got VAST, it's no problem for them to add, change, try any of those other virtualization solutions, including in large environments with CSPs or, HPC environments. They can still go and try and add, VMware or OpenStack or Hyper-V or whatever it is. All of those are supported. And so it makes it a lot more efficient. Your OpEx doesn't go up because you've already got the same process for provisioning and managing and doing all this functionality around your storage for any of those solutions with VAST. So that's something that's a little unique that we're able to provide that some of the other options, some of the other storage solutions can't necessarily provide holistically, and maybe also in depth. That's another piece of it. Being able to not necessarily say, oh yeah, that's just a check mark that we can do. No, we can do all of these very well. That's something that's not very common in some of the other storage solutions.
And maybe elaborating on this too, what we find across our customer base is that people enter into a relationship with VAST for typically one or a couple use cases, and then those use cases expand. And the only exception to that, I would say, is the data protection use case, where you're positioning VAST as your repository for your backups. That's one that doesn't mix and match as well, simply because some of the things that you may be mixing and matching with are the things that you're protecting with your backups. So you would certainly not want those on the same physical device if one is supposed to protect the other. However, you can still use the same technology and the same skill set to have that cluster that is for data protection. But then all of the other use cases you see here around data lake and data warehouse, these HPC use cases and databases, a lot of bare metal. We've got NAS use case. All of these things, the weight of that data is typically much larger than the data specific to virtualization across our customers. So yes, we can put some data stores, some virtual disks, or some, in the case of Kubernetes, some PVCs, persistent volumes, and set claims on those, and have a lot of dynamic things on there with that CSI driver. The whole point of having these VMs and stuff is to do compute and run applications. And more often than not, those applications themselves rely on data elsewhere, not just what's in its local, virtualized drive. So having that giant data lake of information, these VMs can be the ones, or their containers are the ones that are, potentially reading all of that through S3 and then running some of these, analytics workloads and stuff on it. And then VAST, we've got a lot of stuff out there in the marketplace that we don't need to cover right here, specific to those use cases. Just want to make it very clear that, one of the things that makes VAST a great choice is mix and match in that same box, and that box can scale to meet any size that we've seen. We can go up into the exabytes in a single cluster, and performance-wise, it's composable. More and more C nodes, it just gets bigger and it gets better, and it doesn't get slower as it gets bigger. It's actually the opposite. We can scale linearly, we can scale asymmetrically, adding performance as needed, adding capacity as needed.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads into this, right? Rob, go. I mean, if you want to continue.
Yeah, it almost covered it completely in that matter.
I mean,
but
that's what I'm saying. Let's go to the next slide because
yeah.
you're covering it.
So at VAAST, we like to talk about our data platform, and the reason that we talk about it as a data platform is because if we refer to it as storage, we are greatly doing ourselves a disservice. There is in this component here, that data store, that's the piece that we refer to as our storage. And certainly we got our start as storage, right? When somebody purchases a VAAST cluster, they're buying it to store their goods on it. It is for storage purposes. It's got all of the protocols, and we do have a slide to cover those. And then beyond that, we've added a database to that a couple years ago. So taking advantage of this scalable architecture we built, this DAYS, disaggregated shared everything architecture, we've got a scalable database component in there that continues to get better and improve. We've got internal services that run and consume that database. So we've got things like a catalog that will take point-in-time slices of all the data on the system, so that you can query that very quickly to find things without having to crawl through all the data. We've got an audit database that fits in there as well for all of the protocol auditing, so that when things go bump in the night, you need to figure out kind of what happened and where, that you've got a rich audit log for that. And the data engine is very much something that is about bringing compute more into this platform as well, so that we're running much richer services on top of it. And again, we do have quite a bit out there on the database engine, and things like some of the NVIDIA NIMs that are coming, the inferencing modules that will sit right in here as well. And then the data space as a whole is how we refer to our how various clusters talk to one another. We used to refer to it as a global namespace. So this data space takes into account things like replication, things like having a distributed set of VAAST clusters globally, that different data can reside in different places, but be accessible to all of them in a very efficient manner. So there really is a lot more to it than just storage here. But I would like to also not diminish what we've done on the storage side, because we've got a fantastic product, even if you put us in a little silo and just call us storage.
Yeah, so and that kind of lends to the
yep.
next slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about your storage solutions, if you haven't looked at all of the different use cases or potential use cases in your enterprise that you may need that storage platform to provide, then you're doing yourself a disservice unless you're really wanting to silo that specific storage solution. I mean, some of the stuff that Rob mentioned, all these different solutions VAAST can provide, and again, simplifying that aspect to one or two admins being able to do all of these different storage capabilities, and not necessarily looking at it as this is just a bucket where I store things. There's actually now actions you can take on that storage, depending on what that solution is that you're using. Some of the database stuff, some of the Trino and Kafka stuff, and then the big thing that we're seeing a huge amount of usage is AI. Being able to actually run AI on the storage platform itself. So you're not transferring data out to something else to process and then putting it back. It's actually running on the platform itself. And then, of course, we're talking about virtualization. This is where we're talking about the different types of protocols, right? We can get back to just super basic and say, okay, well, what does that solution require? Is it NFS? Is it SMB? Is it block? And now, again, with VMware, we support NFS and NVMe over TCP. If you've seen any of my documents previously from VMware, that was actually one of the most popular when I was talking with customers, was using NVMe over TCP. There's the old legacy iSCSI. We don't support that. And really, there's no reason to, especially with the actual low-level architecture. The way VAST is designed is all using the NVMe protocol, which lends to huge parallelization, a lot more functionality. And so we wouldn't want to limit that functionality by putting something archaic like iSCSI on top of it. So when customers are looking at, okay, well, I've got VMware, I can use NFS or Block, I can use NVMe TCP, and maybe I want to add, say, Hyper-V. Okay, well, we've got SMB, no problem. You can add that and use that functionality. Or, Rob mentioned a lot of the Kubernetes. We've got CSI drivers that allow you to run them natively on the platform. So you see, these are key pieces that you want to think about when you're looking at different solutions and what your current infrastructure has. And if you already have VAST, which would be fantastic, then you don't have to worry about whether or not you can look at that solution or not, because we support all of those different solutions.
And I just realized down here, up in the top right, where we have volume store APIs, Cinder is notably missing here. We've recently released a Cinder driver. It is undergoing some of the certification right now. Our Manila driver for OpenStack for file volumes is already certified and available in the newer versions in the upstream catalog. We've got an OpenShift operator for our CSI driver. So the CSI driver image and the operator are certified on OpenShift from 4.13 all the way through 4.18, 4.18. So those are available as well. And then the piece that is not getting much attention here in the center is that unified security, multi-tenant, and cloud scale. That multi-tenant piece, I want to drill in more. For service providers, this is incredibly important. And multi-tenancy, the way I like to think of multi-tenancy is almost like security. And in security, you kind of have this gradient that goes from convenience to lockdown and nobody can get in whatsoever, and there's some kind of line and gradient in between there, and that where you land is a little bit different for each organization. I would like to think of multi-tenancy as the same thing. You've got on one side, all of the infrastructure under the covers is completely hidden from the tenants, the people consuming it. An example would be something like Salesforce. If your company uses Salesforce.com, or Slack, for example, you're using that. You don't know which other tenants are also using that infrastructure. You don't know what, if you happen to be on a piece of compute, that other people are doing things unrelated to your company, and you don't really care. You go in, you only see your company's stuff, and under the covers, that doesn't need hard separation in terms of how the app is built. But then we slide over to trends that we're seeing, especially amongst our AI cloud providers. We're seeing the desire for their customers to want a cloud to give as much DevOps control and as much infrastructure control right down to their end customers. And so that is our bar on where we're trying to get our multi-tenancy all the way to, so that a service provider can confidently give a big subcomponent, portions of that infrastructure, as much bare metal control as possible down to their customers. And so when we have that gradient there, it's really important that you've got a solution that takes this very seriously. So it is in an enterprise, you may use some tenancy. I always recommend adding another tenant for if you're doing Kubernetes and a CSI driver. I say, create another tenant in VAST. It's a different file system space. We can and also it's got control plane isolation, so that service account that comes in and does all the automation of the dynamic PVCs has the ability to create the abstractions under the covers. So on the VAST side, those are called views, and to manage view policies and create these PVCs out of these views, which are like exports and shares and such, and buckets and all the way that we present our data. and without being able to then go and mess with the rest. So if it is a big, happy enterprise family, we don't need tenancy. We know who everybody is. It doesn't matter if, a name of a tenant leaks or anything. I mean, okay, fine. You can still take advantage of that to keep least privilege practices in place. And nothing stops those systems from still being able to go to data in that system that might be in a different tenant, because depending on how we set up our virtual IP pools in the back end, you could have them so that they're tenant-based VIP pools. Basically, if the network doesn't block you from getting to that, you can get to the front door and then ask for that data, and then the rules within that tenant apply. So we've been investing a lot more and more in our multi-tenancy. And in our latest 5.3 release, we've brought a lot of the work that we've done under the covers up into the UI. So now we can have tenant admins and essentially give a slice of this vast cluster, that tenant, and give that out to customers as well, while not letting them do things that would jeopardize the entire cluster, or let them get into other tenants, or even see the name of other tenants. So all of this very important. The namespace of tenancy is also very important. If someone wants to create /test in their tenant, because that's the first thing they do, they shouldn't get an error that they can't do that because /test was already used for whatever reason. So everything they have in their namespace is there. And then under the covers, everything is tied together in the same namespace from a deduplication perspective. So our similarity runs on that. And so if one customer has their own images for VMs that are, based on, Linux Rocky 9.2 or something, and then each customer kind of has their own and their templates, and they manage those. You would, as a provider under the covers, you would still get the efficiency of deduplicating all of that and reducing all that with vast similarity, so that you are stretching your investment of raw flash as far as possible with all the things that we do to really drive those prices down and make it quite economical.
Yeah, and one of the things you were just talking about, Rob, was that whole on the public cloud side, when they're looking at solutions, what do they get, right? Because a lot of times when there's some of the other storage vendors are saying, oh yeah, we're in the public cloud, they only offer a small subset of the features. Whereas with VAST, we can offer quite a bit more of the features into each of these tenants that basically look as if they're getting their own full file system and functionality of a full storage suite. So that's something that you want to think about if you're doing stuff in the cloud as well. Now, another piece that we're looking at here, we were talking about the protocol. So this is just kind of revisiting that piece of it where customers can look at and say, okay, what does that solution require for its storage capabilities? And does my storage solution support that? So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the fact that a lot of the stuff that VAST develops are common protocols. They're not bespoke solutions that require specific drivers, or a lot of these are just industry standard. And that really lends itself to simplifying the deployment of your infrastructure. Because if you've got something that's very bespoke, that means now you've got to have somebody that learns how to do that deployment or that configuration or whatever it might be. So we really want to stick away from that. And that was actually something I used to say quite a bit under the VMware side too, was the more customization you do in your environment, the more you've got to have documentation. You've got to make sure everybody understands that. If somebody doesn't follow that and they go and do a new deployment, they didn't follow the special bespoke deployment and it doesn't work, there could be security risks, there could be performance risks. I mean, there's numerous risks that you can have when you start having these really unique one-off deployments. So that's another piece that really makes VAST lend itself to the simplicity and the management. Open RESTful APIs. So at the end of this, we've got some resources available for you. So again, if you want to automate processes, these are standard APIs that you can use to automate, daily tasks that you're going to do all the time. And a lot of the CSPs like using this because even if they're deploying somewhat different, say, protocols or solutions, a lot of the same API processes can be used because they're using it on a simplified, unified platform. So that's something else to think about. And then Rob talked about that security model. That's a huge piece of it because the multi-tenancy functionality, being able to isolate environments if you need to, obviously that's a big CSP thing, but like Rob mentioned, being able to isolate your Kubernetes environment so that you can give the DevOps admins more functionality in managing their storage, right? So when they're doing their claim rules for their PVs and PVCs, they don't have to go ask for permission because basically you've given them their own section of the environment that they can do whatever they need to do. And so that,
and not only is it not the ask for permission, the other thing too that is really near and dear to me is I don't want someone taking credentials I gave them for one purpose, which is, hey, use this but for responsibly by Kubernetes with our driver that's only going to make certain API calls, and then have them take that those credentials and abuse it by doing calls to APIs and stuff that weren't intended by the driver. And so our model that is tightening with every version, and instead of just logical to all of the things, we can do it to very specific things, create views or delete views only without doing view policies, for example. Or if they are doing it's all the logical stuff, having that bound inside a tenant so that it doesn't hit all the rest of the stuff is there too. So and we've got wrappers for the APIs too. So we have if you go to GitHub, you'll find that we have a VastPy, a Python CLI wrapper, so you can do scripting that way. We've got a PowerShell toolkit as well that you can script and hit the APIs with that. And then these the protocols that we're using, kind of going back to that, NFS 3, for example, has been around for a very long time and is very convenient, but inherently quite insecure. And if we add the layer of multi-tenancy to that and the isolation at the network layer and then the data plane isolation, we are not exposing other tenants, root off to things that just say, hey, I'm root, by the way, because I said I was. I'm UID, 1001 because I said I am, let me in. These are things that we can tie to, authentication if we want through like NFS 4, but even through NFS 3, it's a way to safely provide things that are inherently somewhat insecure or very insecure in a secure manner of isolation with the rest of your infrastructure, coordinated to do that. Block is a very interesting one here. It opens a lot of doors for us, and if there's any specific workloads that feel that file doesn't hit quite right, hey, that's in the mix too. Let's say you started down the path of file and you want to switch to block. You could start migrating and do that, and it's nice that all that data that was in file and block and probably will coexist for a short amount of time don't need to have 200% the storage they otherwise would. All of these things lend itself to a platform that is incredibly flexible.
And that leads us into kind of our wrap-up slide, is the pillars for VAST, right? We've got this whole unified data platform. And that's really what we've been trying to talk about, is you can have one unified solution that can take care of all of these different possible virtualized solutions that you may be looking at, and not necessarily have to be one or the other, but can be one and another. In fact, it could be multiple. It could be all of them if you wanted to. And then the architecture, right? All flash. So you don't ever have to worry about the performance capabilities of a VAST platform. All of the disks are NVMe disks, and always lend yourself to this incredible performance. And if you're not familiar with the whole NVMe versus COSI, the big difference holistically is the parallelization of the way it accesses data. The way we used to kind of give an analogy of NVMe versus SCSI is, think about a stadium that's got, say, 30,000 seats. With SCSI, the way that the protocol was written is to have one entrance to those 30,000 seats. So when you want to enter and exit that platform or that stadium, it's going to be very slow because you have to go through one entrance or one exit. The way NVMe is designed is that you can access all 30,000 seats with 30,000 exits or entrances. And so there's a huge amount of parallelization. And the whole day's architecture, what Rob was talking about, was that every compute node has access to every storage node and every SSD. So there's very little east-west traffic. So if one solution's using one node, another solution's using another node, there's no worry about, say, going across your typical two controller type system where it's got to go between east and west to get to certain data because maybe the data is on this node and this data is on that node. That doesn't happen with the day's architecture. Every compute node can get to every single SSD, which lends to huge performance gains. And then, of course, consumption. We've talked about how we've got these tenants that you can isolate your environment. So if you really want to lock these down, or like Rob had great examples with the whole root functionality. You give root with inside one tenancy, that's all they have access to. They don't have access to the rest of the infrastructure. And so there's a lot more autonomy that you can give within a tenant or that specific solution. That doesn't even have to be, like for a CSP for different customers, that can be for different solutions. And then, of course, support. We have something called co-pilots where customers get dedicated support for their platform. And so the support that you get from VAST is very white glove, very hands-on. You can get responses very quickly. We've even got a whole team of engineers in case there's a bug. Maybe there's something that has to be fixed. We see incredible turnarounds for bug fixes. So when you're thinking about different platforms, make sure you're thinking about all these different values, all these different consequences that may be or come to fruition when you look at certain types of solutions. In this case, again, we're talking about virtualization.
And again, I want to reiterate that we have a Q&A. If you look on the right of your screen, there's a Q&A there. If anybody has any questions at this point, feel free to drop them in there. We're more than happy to answer them. If you're otherwise, if something comes to mind afterwards, feel free to reach out and get those answers. We've got some resources up on stage here. Around things like VMware with virtualization, VMware. A lot of times those are almost synonymous. Or if you're talking virtualization, you'll mention VMware, of course, and sort of the OG on that. And in this case, this is our guide for that. And this is taking things. And I talk with customers a lot where they say, "Oh, it's an NFS stage where it can't do this or that," and some of that knowledge is kind of antiquated in the sense that there's some enhancements that came maybe late to the game, but things like NConnect is available to increase performance on that. We've got a recipe for how to utilize a VAST cluster that was built for high parallelization, and ESXi servers were not really built for consuming a large parallel background. And so there's a recipe in there for how to do things to make the most out of it. That leverages our day's architecture, leverages the fact that it doesn't matter which C node we're going into. They all know the state of all the things because the state is in a shared backend common storage. We've got the admin guides for the platform, admin guides for our CSI driver, for file, for block. We've got a COSI driver as well, which is Cloud Object Storage Interface, which is like instead of PVCs, you have buckets, and those can be managed outside of your containers and applications through manifests. We have an API guide. For those of you who are existing VAST customers, if you're not aware of this, in your VMS, when you're logged in, just go to /docs, and there's some great documentation in there on the APIs, including code examples in Go and Python. And also, if you go to /API in your VMS of your VAS cluster, we have Swagger interface, which is like a self-documenting APIs there. So there's it's really rich. We've got more resources than what you see here, but in the context of virtualization, these seem like the right ones to get you started. We've also got catalog entries with Red Hat related to our OpenShift operator. We've got Manila for OpenStack certified. Our Cinder driver is underway. This is the ecosystem is not something that we take lightly. And, once we go down this path, as we're down it, and we have more and more customers adopting things, we will keep up with this fast-moving ecosystem to make sure that this investment that you've made in VAST keeps serving you when those new versions come out and those new APIs and stuff come out, that your back-end infrastructure is going to support it. Any other closing words here for us, Jason? I don't see any questions coming through.
No, that was it. We always try and provide resources that are relevant to the presentation. So hopefully this will get you guys some resources that you need, or if you're interested in looking and seeing what we have. And thanks for attending. Appreciate it tuning in.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.